I didn't set out to eavesdrop. Hell, if I had any idea what I'd overhear, I would have walked right past the patio doors and gone straight to bed. But that night, curiosity got the better of me. Amelia, my wife of 10 years, was out on the deck, speaking low into her phone. The warm evening breeze carried her voice into the house, soft but clear enough to hear. "You know I can't talk long," she said, her tone unusually gentle, almost intimate. I froze mid-step, holding my breath as her words drifted through the sliding glass door I'd left ajar earlier. Amelia had always been an open book, at least, that's what I thought. She wasn't the type to sneak around or hold secrets, and yet, there she was, leaning against the railing, speaking in a voice I didn't recognize. "Next weekend won't work. He'll be here," she continued. "He?" My pulse quickened, and a sour taste filled my mouth. Who the hell was she talking about? I stood there, half hidden in the shadows of the living room, torn between walking outside and demanding an explanation or staying silent to hear more. My rational side told me to step away, let it go. But the knot tightening in my stomach told me something was wrong. Her laugh cut through the night, light, playful, the kind of laugh she hadn't shared with me in months. I know, she said, lowering her voice. "It's not easy for me either." That was all I needed to hear. My heart pounded as I turned away, heading upstairs before she could spot me. I didn't want to confront her, not yet. Not until I had some answers. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, piecing together every subtle change in her behavior over the past few months. The late nights at work, the sudden interest in yoga classes she never seemed to attend, the guarded way she'd been treating her phone. It wasn't just paranoia, was it? I didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore this. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the house felt louder, every shift in the bed from Amelia felt calculated, and the sound of her steady breathing beside me was maddening. It was the breathing of someone at peace. Someone who didn't have a storm swirling in their head, questioning every interaction, every word, every kiss over the last few months. At around 5 a.m., I gave up pretending to sleep and got out of bed. I needed clarity, answers. There was no use torturing myself with assumptions. If something was going on, I'd find out. My opportunity came quicker than expected. Amelia had an early meeting, or so she claimed, and left the house by 6:30. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek before walking out the door, her keys jingling in her hand. I watched her from the kitchen window as she got into her car and drove off. This was my moment. I didn't want to be the kind of guy who snooped around, but after last night, I couldn't ignore the knot in my gut. I started with her laptop. It was sitting on the dining table, just like the night before. She never took it with her in the mornings, claiming she only needed it when she worked from home. I opened the device, expecting it to be locked, but it wasn't. The screen came to life, showing a recently closed video conferencing app. I ignored it and went straight for her emails, the most obvious place to start. But there was nothing unusual. Work emails, newsletters, reminders about yoga classes, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed the calendar app at the bottom of the screen. I clicked it open and scanned through her upcoming events. Most of them were mundane work meetings, a hair appointment, some reminder to pick up something from the grocery store. But then, my eyes landed on a block of time next Saturday marked with just one word, out. That was it. No details, no context. Just out. I stared at it for a while, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. My mind raced. Who marks something like that in their calendar unless they don't want anyone knowing what they're actually doing? I clicked on the event, hoping for more information. Nothing. No location, no attendees, no attached notes. Just that single word. I closed the laptop and sat there, my heart pounding. There wasn't enough to accuse her of anything, not yet. But there was enough to make me feel like I wasn't imagining things. I decided to wait. I wasn't going to jump to conclusions or confront her without solid evidence. But I also wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. If Amelia thought she could keep whatever this was hidden, she was wrong. The rest of the week passed slowly. I kept up appearances, acting like everything was fine, but inside, I was on edge. Every time she looked at her phone, every time she laughed at something, I analyzed it. Was she texting someone? Was that laugh meant for me or someone else? By Friday, I was ready to burst. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. Saturday morning, Amelia got up early again. She was dressed casually, but her outfit was different. It wasn't her usual yoga pants and oversized sweatshirt. She was wearing a fitted blouse and jeans, the kind of outfit she used to wear when we went on dates. "I'll be back later," she said, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just out," she replied, smiling. "I might stop by that new cafe downtown." I nodded, watching her leave. My heart was racing. This was it. The calendar entry. Out. The second she drove off, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to see for myself where she was going. I kept my distance, staying a few cars behind as she drove through town. She didn't stop at the cafe like she said she would. Instead, she turned into the parking lot of a small hotel on the outskirts of town. I parked down the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My stomach churned as I watched her step out of the car and walk toward the hotel's side entrance. I needed to see more. I got out of the car, keeping my distance, and followed her. She entered the building and disappeared down a hallway. I didn't dare go inside yet. I didn't want to be seen. After about 20 minutes, she reappeared, this time with a man. He was tall, well-dressed, and completely unfamiliar. They were laughing as they walked out together, heading toward his car. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. Amelia was cheating on me. The weight of it hit me like a truck. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was sneaking around behind my back. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, and my mind was a blur. I got back in my car and drove home, feeling like my world had just been ripped apart. That evening, when she returned, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, and went about her evening routine. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Not yet. But I knew the confrontation was coming. And when it did, I wouldn't hold back. The hardest part about planning the confrontation was waiting. Sitting there with the knowledge of what she'd done while pretending everything was normal was like holding a live wire in my hand. Every fake smile I gave her, every casual conversation, felt like a betrayal of myself. But I wasn't going to rush it. The pictures I'd taken of her with that man at the hotel were enough to prove my suspicions, but I wanted more. I needed the full story, every detail. If I confronted her too soon, she'd lie, twist the truth, try to make me doubt what I already knew. Sunday passed without incident. Amelia acted like the perfect wife, cooking dinner, sitting next to me on the couch, and chatting about mundane things like work and grocery shopping. I responded when necessary but avoided looking directly at her. I didn't trust myself not to snap. Monday morning, she left for work as usual, and I called in sick. I wasn't sick, but I couldn't focus on anything else. I spent the day going through every piece of technology she owned, looking for more evidence. Her laptop didn't give me much. It seemed she was careful not to leave anything incriminating there. Her phone was locked, and I didn't know her passcode. Then I remembered the smart speaker in our living room. It synced with her phone for music and reminders. I dug through the app, searching for activity logs. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, there it was, a recent voice command to set a reminder. Meeting James, Saturday, 10 a.m., Crescent Hotel. That was the name of the man I'd seen with her. James. My blood boiled as I stared at the screen. She had planned this for days, maybe weeks, and thought she was clever enough to get away with it. That night, I decided I'd had enough. Amelia came home late, claiming she'd had to stay at the office for a meeting. She was wearing the same business attire she'd left the house in, but I noticed her hair was neater than it had been in the morning. Her makeup looked fresher too. I sat in the kitchen, waiting for her to finish her usual routine of dropping her bag on the counter and checking her phone. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Long," she said with a sigh, pouring herself a glass of water. "I had back-to-back meetings all day." I nodded, watching her closely. "Busy schedule." "Yeah," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "What about you? How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the photo gallery, and slid it across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she picked up the phone. "Take a look," I said, leaning back in my chair. Her eyes widened as she swiped through the photos, her and James, laughing together outside the hotel, walking side by side toward his car. She froze, staring at the screen, her face draining of color. "Care to explain?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Amelia set the phone down, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I said, my voice hardening. "Because it looks like you're sneaking around with another man." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not what you think, I swear. James is just a friend." "A friend?" I laughed bitterly. "Do you meet all your friends at hotels and laugh like that while you're sneaking out the side door?" "I can explain," she said, her voice rising. "It's not." "Stop lying," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "I followed you. I saw you. Don't insult me by pretending this is innocent." Her tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry?" I said, my anger boiling over. "Sorry for what, Amelia? For sneaking around? For lying to my face? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" She didn't answer, and that silence was louder than anything she could have said. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. She shook her head, still hiding her face. "Look at me," I yelled. Amelia flinched but slowly lowered her hands. "It's not what you think," she said again, her voice trembling. "It only happened once." "Once?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "So, what, you just woke up one day and decided to cheat on me? Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I leaned forward, staring her down. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. What you did was a choice. You made a choice to betray me, to destroy everything we've built together." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, but I felt no sympathy. "Who is he?" I asked. "Tell me everything." "He's someone from work," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a few months ago. We were working on a project together, and what?" I interrupted. "You couldn't keep it professional? You thought it was okay to screw around behind my back?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. We connected. But I ended it, I swear." "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't sit there and try to justify this. You don't get to act like the victim here. You did this. You made this choice." She didn't argue, just sat there, crying into her hands. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, trying to control the rage bubbling inside me. "So, what now?" I asked after a long silence. "What do you expect me to do with this?" "I don't know," she said, her voice small. "I don't want to lose you." I laughed bitterly. "You should have thought of that before you decided to cheat." The room fell silent again, the air thick with tension. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Don't talk to me. Don't touch me. Just stay out of my way." Amelia nodded, tears still streaming down her face, and I left the kitchen, slamming the door behind me. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of our confrontation. Amelia's tears, her feeble excuses, they did nothing to temper the searing anger burning inside me. She was sorry? She didn't want to lose me? Where was that regret when she was sneaking around with James, making plans to meet at hotels? I wasn't ready to decide what I wanted yet. Divorce? Separation? Therapy? None of it seemed right in the heat of the moment. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. The next morning, I woke up with a singular focus: I would take control of the situation. I had spent years building a life with Amelia, trusting her, supporting her through everything. If she wanted to destroy it, I would make sure she felt the consequences. I started with her workplace. She had been careful to keep her affair discreet, or so she thought, but it was likely that James was someone she interacted with regularly. I needed more information. I remembered the reminder I'd found on the smart speaker app: meeting James, Saturday, 10 a.m., Crescent Hotel. It was my first solid lead. I called a friend who worked in IT security. Let's call him Greg. We had worked on a few projects together in the past, and I knew he had a knack for digging up information. I sent him the name James along with a list of employees from Amelia's company, something I had found during one of their holiday newsletters a few years ago. Can you cross-check this name with any social media or public records? I asked Greg. Give me a few hours, he said. While I waited for Greg's results, I decided to dig through Amelia's personal life more thoroughly. She had taken the kids to her parents' house for the afternoon, no doubt trying to avoid me. That gave me the space I needed. I started with her phone. She had always been protective of it, but I remembered a trick I'd read about, using facial recognition while someone was sleeping. Last night, I had hovered her phone in front of her face as she dozed off. It unlocked without issue, and I'd quickly disabled the feature. Now I had full access. The first place I checked was her messages. The usual suspects were their chats with friends, family, and co-workers. But there was nothing from James. I scrolled back further, then checked her deleted messages folder. There it was. James, can't stop thinking about Saturday. You're amazing. Amelia, me too. Let's talk about next time, smiley face. The thread wasn't long, but it was enough to confirm the depth of their relationship. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to myself for safekeeping. Then I checked her photos. Most of them were innocuous pictures of the kids, meals, random selfies. But buried among them were a few photos that made my stomach turn. Amelia and James, together at a restaurant, smiling for the camera. Another of them in what looked like a hotel room, James's arm wrapped around her shoulders. By the time I finished, I felt like I had been gutted. But I wasn't done. Greg called me back a few hours later. I found your guy, he said. James Whitmore. Works in the same department as Amelia, 2 levels above her. Looks like he's her direct supervisor. Of course, it had to be her boss. My teeth clenched as I thanked Greg and hung up. Now I had everything I needed to proceed. The first step of my plan was subtle. I wanted Amelia to feel the weight of what she'd done, but I also wanted her to squirm. I compiled all the evidence I had: photos, screenshots, emails, and printed everything out. Then I placed it in a neatly labeled envelope marked, for HR. The next morning, before Amelia left for work, I handed her the envelope. What's this? She asked, her voice wary. Your next problem, I said coldly. I suggest you open it when you get to the office. Her face paled, but she didn't argue. She slipped the envelope into her bag and left the house without another word. I knew it would only be a matter of hours before the fallout began. Sure enough, by midday, Amelia called me, her voice frantic. What did you do? She demanded. I think you already know, I replied. They're calling me into a meeting with HR, she hissed. Why are you doing this? Do you want me to lose my job? I didn't make you cheat with your boss, I said. But I won't let you destroy our family without consequences. She started to cry, but I hung up before she could manipulate me further. The second step was more personal. I contacted James's wife. I had seen her name on his social media profile, Rebecca Whitmore, and found her contact information through a mutual acquaintance. "Hi, Rebecca," I said when she picked up the phone. "You don't know me, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband." Over the next hour, I laid everything out for her. She was silent for most of it, but I could hear the devastation in her voice when she finally spoke. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I had no idea." We exchanged contact information and agreed to stay in touch. I wasn't sure what Rebecca would do with the information, but at least she knew the truth now. The final step was ensuring Amelia felt the full weight of her choices. I met with a divorce lawyer later that week, armed with all the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer assured me that with the photos, messages, and details about her affair with her boss, I would have a strong case for custody of the kids and division of assets. When I handed Amelia the papers, she broke down completely. "Please, don't do this," she begged. "We can fix this." "It's too late for that," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Amelia. Now I'm making mine." The days following the delivery of the divorce papers were eerily quiet. Amelia stayed in the guest room, rarely coming out except to use the bathroom or grab food. The kids were still at her parents' house, and I hadn't yet told them what was happening. Part of me wanted to shield them from the mess as long as possible, though I knew that time was running out. One evening, 4 days after I'd handed her the papers, I found her sitting at the dining table, staring at the empty surface. She didn't look up as I entered the room, but the tension was unmistakable. "We need to talk," she said softly. I sat down across from her, keeping my expression neutral. "What is it?" Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them on the table. "I'm sorry," she began. "For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't reply right away, letting her words hang in the air. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you did it anyway," I said finally. "So what exactly are you apologizing for? Getting caught?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'm apologizing for the choices I made. For the damage I caused." "Why did you do it, Amelia?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "You owe me that much, at least." She looked down, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. "It wasn't about you, or us, or anything you did wrong. James made me feel seen, I guess. Like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt in years." "And you couldn't come to me?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "You couldn't tell me you felt invisible? Instead, you went behind my back, with your boss no less, and destroyed our marriage?" "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "It started as just friendly conversations. Then one thing led to another, and you made a choice," I interrupted. "You chose him over me, over our family." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "Yes. I did. And it was the worst mistake of my life." I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You've hurt our kids. You've destroyed the life we built together. And for what? A fling with a man who probably doesn't give a damn about you." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. She needed to hear it. "Do you know what the kids are going to think when they find out?" I continued. "Do you know how hard it's going to be for them to trust anyone after this? Or how much of their lives are going to be spent dealing with the fallout of your selfishness?" "I'll fix it," she said through her tears. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." "You can't fix this," I said coldly. "There's no going back. You made your bed, Amelia. Now you have to lie in it." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of my words sinking in. Finally, she wiped her eyes and looked up at me. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. No more lies, no more excuses. I want to know everything about your affair, how it started, how long it went on, and why you thought it was worth throwing away our marriage." She nodded, taking a deep breath before she began. "It started about 6 months ago," she said. "James and I were working late on a project, and we started talking about our personal lives. He told me about his problems with his wife, and I told him about how distant things had felt between us. My jaw tightened, but I didn't interrupt. After that, we started spending more time together at work. It felt harmless at first, just two people talking. But then it escalated. He kissed me one night, and I didn't stop him. How many times? I asked bluntly. 3, she said, her voice trembling. It only happened 3 times, and I ended it after the last time. I told him I couldn't do it anymore, that it wasn't right. And the hotel? I pressed. That was the last time, she admitted. Afterward, I told him it was over. I haven't seen him outside of work since then. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. Do you really expect me to believe that? It's the truth, she said desperately. I know I've lied to you before, but I swear, I'm being honest now. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. You've destroyed everything we had, Amelia. Do you even understand that? There's no coming back from this. I'll never be able to look at you the same way again. Her sobs resumed, but I felt no sympathy. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly. The papers are all ready with my lawyer. You'll hear from him soon about the next steps. She nodded, her face crumpling in despair. What about the kids? We'll tell them together, I said. But you need to understand that this is your fault. You're the one who broke this family, not me. She buried her face in her hands, and I stood up, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. As I walked away, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. The confrontation was over, but the road ahead was far from clear. The silence between us in the following days was deafening, yet somehow fitting. Amelia and I had spent a decade building a life together, but the foundation was gone. Now, we were just two strangers sharing a house, avoiding eye contact, and waiting for the inevitable next steps. I spent most of my time in the office, using work as a distraction. On the rare occasions I came home early, I stayed in the garage or the backyard. Anything to avoid Amelia. She was always in the guest room when I got back inside, and I felt nothing but relief at not having to interact with her. I had scheduled a family meeting for Saturday to tell the kids about the divorce. It was a conversation I dreaded more than any other part of this ordeal. They were young, too young to fully understand, but old enough to be devastated. Amelia and I hadn't agreed on much lately, but we did agree that they deserved to hear it from both of us. When Saturday arrived, I sat in the living room, waiting for Amelia to bring the kids back from her parents. My chest felt tight, my stomach churning as I rehearsed the conversation in my head. The front door opened, and the kids came bounding in, their laughter echoing through the house. Amelia followed behind them, her face pale and drawn. She didn't look at me as she closed the door and led the kids to the couch. Why do we have to have a meeting? Our son, Daniel, asked, frowning. Is someone in trouble? I shook my head, taking a deep breath. No one's in trouble, I said. But your mom and I have something important to talk to you about. Their smiles faded, replaced by confusion. Our daughter, Emma, looked between us, her brow furrowed. What's going on? She asked. I glanced at Amelia, who gave me a small nod. Emma, Daniel, I began, your mom and I have decided to get a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's face crumpled almost immediately, his eyes filling with tears. What? Why? He asked, his voice trembling. Emma stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. You're splitting up, she whispered. But, why? Amelia cleared her throat, her voice shaking as she spoke. Sometimes, even when two people love each other, things don't work out the way they hoped. Your dad and I, we've grown apart. That's it? Emma demanded, her voice rising. You just grew apart? That doesn't make any sense. Daniel turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Are we still going to live together? He asked, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, my heart breaking at the sight of his anguish. No, buddy, I said gently. Your mom and I will be living in separate houses, but you'll still see both of us. We'll work out a schedule so you can spend time with both of us. Emma crossed her arms, glaring at both of us. This is stupid, she said angrily. Why can't you just fix it? Amelia's tears started to fall, but I stayed calm. I wish it were that simple, I said. But this isn't something we can fix. We've tried, but it's not working. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his small body shaking with sobs. Emma sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. I know this is hard, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. But we both love you very much. That will never change. Neither of them responded, and the silence was crushing. After the kids went to bed that night, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. It was supposed to be a list of what to pack for when I moved out, but my mind was too scattered to focus. Amelia walked in, hesitating when she saw me. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't look at her. What is there to talk about? She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. I want to apologize again, she said softly. For everything. I finally looked up, meeting her eyes. An apology doesn't fix this, I said flatly. It doesn't undo the damage you've done. I know, she said, her voice trembling. But I still need to say it. I need you to know that I regret everything. I regret hurting you, and I regret what this is doing to the kids. You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around, I said coldly. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. I know you hate me, she said. And I don't blame you. But I hope, someday, you can forgive me. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Forgiveness isn't on my mind right now. My focus is on making sure the kids get through this without being completely broken. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes to make things easier for them. I promise. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The day I moved out was surreal. I had packed up my belongings over the course of several days, loading them into the garage so the actual move would be quick. Amelia stayed out of my way, keeping the kids occupied while I worked. As I carried the last box to the car, Emma and Daniel came running out of the house. Dad! Emma called, her voice shaking. I turned to face them, crouching down as they ran into my arms. Do you have to go? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. I nodded, hugging them tightly. I do, buddy, I said. But this isn't goodbye. You'll see me all the time. I promise. Emma clung to me, her tears soaking my shirt. I don't want things to change, she said. I know, sweetheart, I said, my own voice shaking. But some things are out of our control. What matters is that I love you, and I'll always be here for you. They nodded, their sobs breaking my heart. After a few more minutes, I let them go and stood up. Amelia stood in the doorway, watching silently. I met her gaze briefly before turning away and getting into my car. As I drove to my new apartment, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger. The chapter with Amelia was over, but a new one was beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would do everything in my power to build a life for myself and my kids.